Good morning, my name is Stephen Capaldo. It is Thursday, March 31st, 2022. Welcome, thank you for listening. Today I'm going to talk about a Russian op-ed piece, a newspaper piece, an article that appeared in one of the main Russian news services. And I decided to talk about it because I thought it gives kind of an interesting view of where Russia might be going and what its interaction might be with certain countries, the parallels and where there are similarities and dissimilarities. And I thought it was just good to maybe share some background of this. And this was written not long ago. It was on the 27th, so that's it appeared on the 27th, so that's not even a week ago. Pyotr Akopov is the name of the author, of the writer of the piece, and so I'll just go through it and just talk about some things that appear in there and what the significance of these things might be. So he writes, once hostilities have ceased, there will no longer exist two things, not only the former Ukraine but also the current Russia. So he's saying already that two things are not going to exist the way they were. The former Ukraine as it was is not going to exist, but also the current Russia as it is now is not going to exist. So there's going to be some kind of change in Russia, he's writing. Our country, Russia, has changed. It's just that we don't grasp how deeply the changes will run, as the process in fact has only just begun. But the post-Soviet transitional era has finished. The age of ambivalence, of double-mindedness, of confusion, and different forms of duality has finished. So what he's saying there is that Russia has to decide what it is, what its core values are, and enough of this kind of schizophrenic, who are we type of mentality, ambivalent, double-minded, confused, duality. And he says something, we will live again in the USSR, but not the one feared by anti-Soviets, or dreamt of by communists. And I think it's not going to be the USSR. I mean, I wouldn't put it that way, because then everybody thinks it's going to be like the old USSR, although he does he disclaims it a little bit. It's not the one feared by anti-Soviets or dreamt of by communists. No, not that country. But we are initiating construction of a just, unified, sovereign Russia, conceiving something better than what is enshrined in our national code, strengthening and creating something that will enable us to live in mindful conscience. So he's going to be talking about things like faith and family and fairness, and then he's also going to come up on like what has kind of gone wrong in relationships with the Western countries, between Russia and the West, and especially the U.S., and then Russia and China. And he's going to start to talk about why there is kind of a closer relationship now between Russia and China. Is because of things that have happened, and that have come from others, especially the U.S. And he writes, we have no other alternative. There is no other construct of Russia that could withstand trials in an age of global storm and stress. New Russia, and that would be maybe a better name for what he's talking about, new Russia will not emerge by waving a magic wand, and building it will be much more complex than achieving victory now on the battlefield. Because now you hear all these news media reports, that Russia is not doing well and they're losing and that they're not going to achieve their objectives. Well, I think that's really not it. I think the objectives are being achieved, and many of them have been achieved, which again is not really to take over Ukraine. That's not really the point. It's true that the Donbass republics, they're going to want to know, they're going to want to be asked, what they want for the future. But basically the point is not to take over Ukraine. I think it's an extra burden for Russia probably at this point. The point is really to get rid of biolabs, and to get rid of the child trafficking and the money laundering and which has been caused by this Khazarian neo-Nazi form of government. I mean, that's really something that the UN could have done by organizing a so-called peacekeeping force of different countries, like-minded countries, to go in there and do it. But since the UN is controlled by the people who are causing the problem, well, okay, one country stepped up and said, okay, you may not like our country, you may not like me, the leader, but here's something that's wrong and something that has to be done. This process will require mobilization of spirit and will, strength, and faith. Now, faith has really made a comeback in Russia. It will take not a year, not a decade, but we've already embarked on this path, even if we ourselves have not realized it. We were put on this path not by Putin, rather our Russian history, of which many of us were unaware and did not wish to know it and understand it. And how many people, in, like, let's say in the US, it might be, you might view this from a different perspective in the US, but how many people now are realizing they don't really know their history, they don't really appreciate their history, and in many cases, unfortunately, they don't care about their history. The problem is, the founding fathers came and they really tried to instill godly values into the country, into the documents, and have a government based on those godly values. And it didn't take long for the military, the bad guys, to take over behind the scenes. And they've been running the country and trying to run the world until up to now. And now there's been kind of a counter movement active since the end of World War II, or the assassination of JFK, and all of that's coming to a head right now. And I think will result in the victory of the light forces and the defeat of the dark forces. That's the way it looks. But in Russia, it's kind of the same thing, and people don't realize what their real history is. If you go back, and you have to go back a long way in the case of Russia, because you have this kind of chaos in the post-Soviet period, but then you have the whole Soviet period. The Soviet Revolution was instigated by the same people causing the problems in Ukraine. And so you have to go before that to find some of the real Russian values, like family and like faith and like fairness and that type of thing. So this is what he's saying, is that we've lost our way because we've lost our knowledge and appreciation and understanding of who we are, right? And I think it's with different specific examples in the U.S., you could still kind of draw the same parallel with the U.S. The spirit of Russian history, the spirit of our ancestors, gives us a chance not only to atone for our blame in the collapse of the USSR, it gives us a chance to rectify things through creating and rebirthing the greatness of Russia. I like that turn of phrase, and the greatness of Russia. There you go, make Russia great again. You kind of hear that. If we do not take this opportunity, if we content ourselves with the vestiges of the old world, the remnants of the old world, if we endeavor to limit ourselves to fakes and counterfeits, we will be swallowed up, and not even by our enemies. In other words, we'll do it to ourselves. The cycle of world history will crush us. We will be killed by our own impotence and lies. So we have no right even to be skeptical about our ability to achieve the needed result. We know what we have to do, and we cannot even afford ourselves the luxury of skepticism, or really, can we do it, or are there going to be problems, and this type of thing. What is the main vulnerability of the outgoing Russia, this Russia that is coming to a close? Just like the US and the world and other countries, what is the main vulnerability of the outgoing Russia? Is it our dependence on the outside world, the intellectual servitude of a significant portion of our elite? No, this is only a derivative or a product of the internal weakness of our mindset. Transitional and temporary, but also satisfactory to many of our elites. Post-Soviet state capitalism, or federal national capitalism, bore within itself the original sin of stealing state property to privatize it, when the nouveau riche and opportunists decided that from now on they would be the authorities and masters of life here. And that's what happened when the Soviet Union ended in the early 90s. The people who'd made enough money on the side, they bought up government ministries at what they called at the time fire sale prices, I think was the expression they used, but pretty cheap. And then they turned these government ministries into private now enterprises that serve their own purposes, and they made a lot of money, and they created this class of new Russians called oligarchs. And Putin has had a tough time dealing with them. I think he's been trying to kind of pick them off one by one, but it's been not easy. It's the same thing as the money people in the Western countries. It's not that easy to take them on all at once. Post-Soviet state capitalism bore within itself the original sin of stealing state property to privatize it. Okay, their ideological dependence on the West of these new rich people, new Russians, their mental servitude before advanced Western civilization, or in the face of advanced Western civilization, was only the consequence of scorn toward our own people. So these people who emerged from the wreckage of the Soviet Union, they got rich, and they really turned their backs on their own people. They hated their own people. They scorned their own people. Does it remind you of any kind of ruling class in any other country that you're familiar with? Right? folks who can be deceived and robbed. That's what they think of their Russian citizens, and this is what the elites here think of us, that we're just stupid folk who can be deceived and robbed. Because they are cattle, and the Russian word here is cattle, but it's kind of, it's like we say the sheeple, so you call them cattle or sheeple, because they are sheeple. Stupid retrogrades. Now he doesn't say useless eaters, but you can probably infer that stupid retrogrades. That's kind of a big thing to call the common people, right? Not the marriage of dedication and intellect that was successful in the 1990s. It was already later that Putin took away the oligarchs' power, but even so, a significant portion of our thinking class has continued to live and raise future generations precisely according to this model. There are so-called better people who know what these correct modern values are, and that they should have the power and the money. The elite, including the self-appointed intellectual elite, has been focused on the West as a model to imitate and to rebuild a barbaric Russia. So you see the ruling class has a scorn, a contempt for their own people, the way the ruling class in the US and other countries has that same scorn and contempt. In the last decade, Putin has made truly great efforts to nationalize the elite, but the divide in property and values between the people and the elite is ever widening. Not of all elites. There are quite a few honest, nationally minded government officials and entrepreneurs, and even in the creative arts, especially if you can make your way through the stardust, if they don't get too caught up in their celebrity. There are even people in the creative arts that are thinking about, Russia, putting their country first. But they've gone unnoticed both in Russia and in the West. But when the West decided to cancel Russia, hitting the pocketbook and real estate of only a few rich and well-known individuals, a surprising thing happened. Most of our elite, these rich and well-known individuals, simply left the country. Yes, they very unceremoniously or unspectacularly beat it. Some out of fear, some who simply couldn't breathe the same air as the sheeple. So what happened was not only a betrayal of their own people, there was also what Putin quite rightly called a natural and necessary process of self-cleansing of our society. Everyone saw what the homeland meant to these people in difficult times. When things get tough, just run away. There's a lot of that going on. There is already no way back for them. Not in the sense that they will not return to Russia, many will, and not even that they will be scorned or unemployed. They simply went overboard, and the ship has sailed without them. So they've gone kind of missing in action, and is there going to be a place for them, as the new Russia gets on its feet and rights itself and cooperates with other countries. The formation of a new elite is the major challenge faced by the nation, but it is impossible relying only on ratings of either government officials or TV stars. The formation of the new elite will depend much more on the objectives they will need to accomplish. It is precisely for this reason that people will come and teams will be created. And this is kind of what's being encouraged in the US now, is these kind of local self-governing bodies, like people getting involved at the school board level and this type of thing to come forward and to solve real problems at the real level, the level of the real people. So this might be the same model that will be tried in Russia. In other words, there will be a national government, a federal government for the entire, all of Russia, but then there are going to be these instead of the old, regions or, like in other countries, states, provinces, whatever, instead of those kind of corrupt subdivisions, you just have local people's authorities that get together and they have to solve specific problems so that what has happened in Russia or some other country doesn't happen anymore, right? And these objectives are clear because they do not need to be fabricated. Indeed, our traditional values are, in fact, our model for putting together the new system. Fairness, so you have basically faith, family, and fairness is the socioeconomic principle under which we encourage the laborer, the innovator, the producer, the engineer or technician, the inventor, the creative person. Those who create rather than packaging things up for resale. It is not a denial of the importance of marketing and commerce, it is a differently designed hierarchy of values. Another pyramid on the labor market. Yes, on the market, although with a large influence from the state, from the government. And this may be a little different from country to country, because we don't need to return to Soviet socialism, but we do need to drop the illusion of the invisible hand of the marketplace on an urgent basis. And he's making a reference there to an economist called Adam Smith, who said that supply and demand will regulate everything. And it clearly hasn't regulated everything. You need some type of guiding hand or guiding wisdom, to help people move in a certain direction. And that's why he's saying that he doesn't see Russia as being a country of wide open capitalism. That's really what has happened around the world now, but what it has resulted in is a concentration of resources. Only very few people have almost all the resources. So he's not advocating for that, the author of this piece, but he is saying that government will have some type of guiding role in whatever the economic organization of the country will be. And to drop the illusion of Adam Smith that only supply and demand will solve everything, the invisible hand of the marketplace. No, you need a visible hand that's guiding with wisdom. It has to be guiding with wisdom, of course. Fairness is not abstract. It is always concrete and even national, traditional. The teacher, the physician, the soldier, they're not bean counters or strongmen. Their professions are respected by our people and valued by the state. Only a social mindset of fairness will be accepted. You could say justice there as well. Fairness will be accepted and supported by our people and will become the foundation of our social system, and then no one will be able to destroy it. Because it is indeed in fairness, indeed in conscience, that we find the main criterion guiding our people on all matters. If a thing is done in good conscience, honestly, it is done with strength. A system meeting our national ideas of good and evil, of truth and justice, will offer tremendous internal resilience in the face of all ordeals. And then he talks about unity and commonality. He uses a couple of different words. One is unity, and the other puts commonality. It's not such an easy word, but the origin of the word is interesting. It comes from the word for cathedral. Which is a place where you store your most valuable things, right? So unity and commonality, or unity and common values, maybe, would be a way of putting it. These concepts, while different, are related. Commonality signifies something joint, in common, encompassing us all, from rich to poor, from old to young, making decisions together, common cause, and most importantly, common ideals, and a shared understanding of values. A common symbol of faith. In the Soviet period, commonality and community were replaced with the concept of collectivism, which is more technocratic and moreover carries an aftertaste of thought conformity that is totally unnecessary for us. So he's not he is not preaching any kind of robotic thinking where everybody has to think the same thing. People can think different things, but a country has shared values, and a country is unified on those shared values. How to approach them, people may think there are different ways of approaching them, different ways of handling specific situations. But the groupthink, he's rejecting the groupthink and the thought conformity, collectivist way of thinking that was the hallmark, I would say, of the Soviet system, which again was instituted by the same people causing the problems now in Ukraine. And commonality, or common values, is after all the organizing principle of our country, of our state, even at all levels, from local self-rule to the highest authorities. It is not a dictatorship, not a rejection of diversity, not an imposition of thought conformity. On the contrary, it is a way of seeking the common good, coming to shared opinions through what is now called consensus. And from here we have unity, namely the feeling of responsibility for all of society, in all its diversity and complexity. Commonality is opposed to the destruction or fracturing of society into infinite minorities. It is not canceling them, it is gathering them together into one nation of people. So it's not the balkanization that you see going on in the US, dividing different groups and setting them against each other. That isn't really common values. Common values is what do we believe together as a country. It's not about fracturing people, it's not about balkanizing them, it's not creating all kinds of different minorities and setting them against one another. I think that really the way of the future, I think, here and in other countries is going to be the local authority, local self-government. People take themselves in hand. And Russia is a country where, with different peoples, in other words, you've got sort of an ethnic Russian population that's the majority, and then you've got other groups that speak different languages. And the way it would be is that as an entire nation, the language of administration of the entire nation would of course be Russian. That makes sense. But in some of these other areas where there are different peoples who speak different languages, why could they not organize themselves and live in that language and speak that language and maintain that language in schools, bearing in mind that the language of the whole country would be Russian? And I think that's really the way it will probably go. And in other countries it may work that way. I think in the U.S. the focus has always been English, so I don't know about that principle. But some of these common values in each country, they're going to be expressed a little bit differently too. You're not from one country to the next. You're not going to have exactly the same application of all of the principles. You'll have certain principles. When we get to the victory, God's victory. We'll have basically the same principles for everybody, but they will be applied differently in different places. Which seems to me that's normal, that's logical. And so I'm just going to finish up here. Sovereignty, or as we say in Russian, self-rule, is a principle. In other words, independence, but not only in the worldwide arena or in the economy. The most important sovereignty resides in the heads, brains, and thought. Only an intellectually nation-centered government can be truly sovereign. And he said something about, in parentheses, that he said something about independence in the worldwide economy. And then he made a little footnote in parentheses. He said, the latter, by the way, is not to be confused with full economic self-sufficiency, which is unachievable by any country, unless, of course, the country is forced to live in isolation like North Korea. And it's interesting that he made that little point, is that, yes, North Korea is a self-sufficient country economically, but what he's saying is that isn't really possible to do it in a normal way, that there would never be trade between anybody. You would meet all your needs internally. You would never exchange goods and services with other people, other countries, unless you're forced to live in isolation like North Korea. And I think I'm reading there a little subtle dig into, the West, there, for really the West as maybe being the ones who have forced North Korea to live in isolation. In other words, at the end of the Korean War, this is what happened. Some of the leaders were bought off, and so North Korea was forced to go along with certain things, internally, which have hurt the people. But really, they didn't. What it comes down to is, I think, that North Korea didn't want this banking system. In countries like Iran and Venezuela and Cuba, they didn't want this central bank stuff. And so ways were found to punish countries like that. And I think in the end you might find that North Korea is not exactly what we've all thought, all along. That basically it's because of certain political events they've been forced to live the way they've been living, and certain people have been bought off to force them to live that way. But things may turn out to look quite a bit different than you think. And he's maybe hinting at it a little bit here. I don't want to read too much into it. He didn't explicitly say it, but it's interesting when you talk about economic self-sufficiency and you bring the example of North Korea and the poverty that they've lived in. He's hinting at something here. And no, we do not mean that Russia is a nation of elephants that just goes off and does what it wants. Rather, that we rely on our own ideas and principles, which I think any self-respecting nation should do. Our own, namely those formulated by the entirety of our historical and spiritual experience, by all of our ups and downs, by our deeds and experiments. And just in the last century, we've had as many of these deeds and experiments as the majority of peoples have had for as long as they've existed. They went from Tsarism to the Soviet Union and now post-Soviet, and they've had all kinds of deeds and experiments. And they've gone all different ways, all ups and downs. And here is an important point regarding what we lack. And the only thing, now watch this, the only thing that we really should learn from foreigners' views of their own countries, in other words, the way foreign countries each one puts their own country first, this is the only thing we should really be learning from foreigners, the idea of putting our country first, what he calls Russia-centeredness. The idea of putting our country first, that's the lesson we should learn from other countries. They do it in their own cases, we should do it in our case. This is not pridefulness, not ego, and not even great power chauvinism. our thinking, and certainly not only geopolitical, that is only a byproduct, must become Russo-centric, centered on our nation. In other words, as the Chinese have always done, in viewing the entire world as a suburb or an extension of eternal China. So this is what he's proposing. It probably sounds shocking that we put we put our country first, and the other countries are there, and we're neighbors with them, and we trade with them, and we're courteous with them. But we put our country first, and the rest is the other countries. We're just kind of thinking, what could they add to our country based on what we have and what we need? What could they add to our country? But we put our country first is really the point that he's trying to make. And Russia and China together. Well, why are they doing more things together now? It's because of the way that the U.S. has reacted on many fronts. Just kind of not listening to certain points that Russia has been trying to make about their own security, and the U.S. becoming involved in this and promoting this corrupt system in Ukraine, in the government of Ukraine. And really just letting that go and ignoring it. And so finally Russia has said, well, we have to find a way to do business another way. We said we can't keep doing business the same way. And we also need to expose what's going on in Ukraine. And so this is maybe the explanation of some of the things that have been happening lately. And if our worldview goes this way, meaning nation-centered, this will only strengthen our mutual understanding with our neighbors, and will forge a union of two great civilizations, Russian and Chinese, that would be much more firm than it was in the days of the USSR. Because the new USSR, or a new Russia, whatever it will be called, a just, unified, and sovereign Russia, would then be standing on the most reliable of possible foundations. So anyway, that was an op-ed piece with my commentary that I think does a lot to explain Russian thinking and how it parallels with the thinking of other countries, but also where there are some differences, between Russia and other countries, particularly the U.S. and Western countries. So, okay, a little bit different. I'll close there, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you again. Bye for now.